So, ladies and gentlemen, I have a great pleasure to talk to fantastic trumpet player, composer, and just a good friend, Mr. Leroy Jones from New Orleans. And I would like to ask you several questions. First of all, you know, in my eyes, you are very special in your field because you came from New Orleans, and somehow you keep these New Orleans feelings. I mean, feelings of old traditional jazz, and at the same time you are contemporary man, so you play any style like bebop or hard bop, so and you combine together all of those lovely styles, and you sound great. So can you tell me something about your childhood? So when do you start to play?
Well, I started playing in school band when I was 10 years old, and that was in 1968, and I was attending an elementary school called St. Leo the Great, and the bandmaster, band director there was a nun, Sister Hillary.
Wow.
Mary Hillary, who also played trumpet, is her principal instrument, but of course she played several other instruments, being a music major and a teacher, and she is the one who discovered that I had a high aptitude for music. So my parents rented a cornet for me. Back in those days, most of the present-day trumpet players played the cornet, just like Louis Armstrong, and exactly. A lot of the cornet was always, when you were looking at music, it was cornet parts and not trumpet parts. And so I had a cornet that my parents rented for 3 months, and I began
so
to
they want to see it.
Does
it work or not?
Yeah. You make sure, yeah. Because, you know, our children, you pick up something and then you decide, oh, that's not what I want to do.
Very smart for parents.
So they said, so after 3 months of, I was taking a private lesson with a trumpet teacher well, Sister Hillary actually was my first private teacher. Every Saturday I would have a lesson for an hour, and I practiced and started just like most young students start with the Bellwin elementary book, the Bellwin method, intermediate and progressive, and move on to those different technical books to learn how to play the instrument. And I joined the band, and so Sister saw how much progress I was beginning to make quickly, and she suggested that my parents get me a new trumpet. So I got a new horn after about 1 year, and I've been playing ever since. Of course, growing up in New Orleans, in the neighborhood where I grew up, by the time I was 12 years old, I was exposed to the brass band music.
Yeah.
And a fellow by the name of Danny Barker, who you've probably heard of. He was a jazz guitarist, Danny Barker.
Yeah, and banjo player.
And banjo and guitar, but you know, banjo, he played guitar mostly when he worked with Cap Calloway in the 30s, and then he's worked with Dizzy, he's worked with Billie Holiday, he's with Danny, and he was spending a lot of time in New York. Actually, he was living in New York during that time, but he moved back to New Orleans during the time when I just began to play. And he lived around the corner from my house, from my parents' house. Wow,
nice neighborhood.
That neighborhood, yeah.
For the young musician.
Yeah, Danny, Dave Fatman Williams, the guy who wrote Ate Up the Apple Tree, lived around the corner. There was an older gentleman, played trumpet by the name of Ernest Cagnolati, whose grandchildren I grew up with, and one of his grandkids was a member of the band that I'm about to tell you about, that was organized by Danny Barker. And that band was the Fairview Baptist Church Christian Marching Band, later to be known as the Fairview Brass Band. Right. And it was a band comprised of young musicians who were under the age of 18.
I see.
And Danny was a member of the Fairview Baptist Church.
Well, this is quite interesting because everybody knows that jazz born in the poorest blocks in New Orleans, but at least from your story, I can see jazz was very much related to Baptist Church, and so that's why, I mean, all of those gospel feelings.
Well, I would have to say that the soulful edge of my playing comes from being exposed to the gospel music in the Baptist Church, because I was raised Catholic, which I went to Catholic school, St. Leo the Great, and I went to Catholic high school, St. Augustine, and then even had a year at a Catholic college, which Loyola University is actually a Catholic. You have to pay to go to that school. But for me, what happened is that Danny used to hear me practicing in my parents' garage diligently every day. I'd come home from school, do my homework, then I'd hit the garage for a couple of hours till dinner. My mom called me to eat, and then after dinner, I'd go back and practice until it was time to get ready for the next day of school.
So then he listened to you and he decided to invite you.
He could hear me practicing.
Oh, lovely.
And in those days, I played very loud, so you could hear me 4 blocks away, you know, so even with the windows down. And often I'd have the garage door up, and there were several other youngsters in my neighborhood who also played in school band. And often we would get together and jam, and we had an old stereo, phonograph that my parents had given to me because they had purchased a new one. And I had some LPs that I would listen to, some records. Back then I was listening to first Louis Armstrong because they had him. He was really the first trumpet player that his sound caught my ear. Even before I picked up an instrument, I heard his sound, and it stimulated something in me to want to play that instrument. And later I got, you know, some records. I had also Al Hurt, who's another great trumpet player from New Orleans. Also, I had a Shorty Rogers, West Coast jazz record with Shorty Rogers. And my father liked Freddie Hubbard, so there was a few Freddie Hubbard LPs in there. And even some old 78s of some stuff with Louis, with the Hot 5 and the Hot 7.
Oh,
they had some of those things. So I was able to listen to those things when I was young and try to emulate those Louis solos, you know, transcribe and transpose those solos. So we're trying to play exactly what he played. And I guess...
What was the favorite?
Well, the favorite solo, and I'd heard Louis Armstrong play the solo earlier in like maybe when he in the late 20s, early 30s, is "Ain't Misbehavin'," and there's a thing that he does later, like in the late 50s and 56 or 57 with his all-star band, where he plays that really hot cadenza at the end, and it's just the drums going, and he ends up playing these different arpeggios till he goes up to this high F, and it was like, and so I mean, and by the time I was 13, 14, I could play that his note, lick for lick, I could play that solo, and that left a very strong impression on me.
Leroy, you said that you played very loud when you practiced at the garage, but nowadays I would say your style is somehow more or less related to Clifford Brown feeling, and you never play loud now. You play soft and very in pitch and very sophisticated, I would say. That very much different.
Well, I've tried to have some elegance to my playing these days, I think, because I've developed more of a technique of playing. I think most children, when they first pick up a brass instrument, or any instrument for that matter, but especially brass and trumpets, you play with a lot of pressure, and you know, until you learn how to use your diaphragm and to breathe, and you know, you play wind instruments, so you know about using the diaphragm, and that helps you to be able to play in the manner of speaking, the way you would sing, or the way a violin would play. And Clifford, of course, Clifford Brown, and many other, you know, Lee Morgan, Kenny Durham, you know, a bunch of other players, Miles Davis, you know, going. They had this concept, I guess, stuck with me. When by the time my first Clifford Brown record I owned was in 1978. I was 20 years old. Someone turned me on to it and said, and until then, and I had been listening to Freddie Hubbard, who was, of course, like supposedly Clifford reincarnated.
Yeah, of course.
So if you were hearing Freddie, you were hearing Clifford. Like if you were hearing Clifford, you were hearing Fats Navarro.
Right.
But I mean, because all of those influences.
Fats Navarro was before Clifford.
That's right, and direct influence on Clifford. From what I've read historically, that he was a major influence in Clifford, and Clifford just took his approach and his articulation and modified it to his own.
Exactly.
Which is what I think we all do, because we first must hear something. It first comes to hearing, then comes to speaking. So I think, you know, as every musician, it's what he puts out is an accumulation of all of the different musical forms and musical styles that he's been exposed to.
Well, when I think about those two guys, what you named, I mean, Fats Navarro and Clifford Brown, they left too early.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
both of them. And think if not this crash of the
Yeah.
car, so
Yeah.
maybe all jazz will not follow Miles Davis, but Clifford Brown.
That's very true. That's
Might
true.
happen.
Maybe so. And then maybe even instead of it would have been as where like Quincy Jones is now would be Clifford Brown is or something. I mean, you know, seeing Clifford as probably being an you know, because Quincy played in that band with Clifford, and then with Lionel Hampton's band,
Right.
And if it's when you know Quincy Jones was only 17, 18 years old, and so he knew those. He was there, and he's still here and doing what he's doing. And of course, being so dynamic, his range of doing all types of genres and you know producing records and what.
Yeah.
Not to say that Clifford chose to have done that, but I agree with you that the whole modern jazz, the idea of modern jazz, would have taken on a different face if Clifford would have still been around. I think so too.
Now, I would like to ask about the your project, Spirit of New Orleans. So this is somehow you married with a fantastic Katya Toivola, trombone player lady, you know, who just, you know, she's really amazing, I would say. And you made this kind of band which somehow having this spirit of New Orleans, but there's a Finnish musicians inside. Are you only one American in this band?
Yes, usually, yes. Whenever I come to Finland and play in Helsinki or play here at Baltic Jazz or other festivals that we happen to luck up on to play at, I'm usually a featured artist, the featured artist with the band. And I've also recorded on a few records with them. And normally, often we'll have a female vocalist like Eepi Yrsin or someone like that with us. And occasionally there is an American singer may join as a guest, like Trisha Boutte.
Trisha Boutte, wow, yeah. Yourself, you're a very good singer. You can sing like whatever, fantastic songs, and yeah, you really have to.
Thank you. You know, I enjoy singing, and I guess I first started singing in 1978 when I worked a gig on Bourbon Street at a club called the Maison Bourbon, and it was with a band. The band leader was a clarinet player, great clarinet player named Hollis Komush, and that band had a piano player from the old times. They called him Little Daddy, Frank Mollier. And if you Google him, his name comes up. He's from the old timer from way back style into piano playing, and he knew a lot of songs, and he had a way of playing that really kind of gets you going, you know. And Nicholas Payton's, the trumpet player's father, was on the bass back there.
Wow.
Walter Payton was in the band, yeah. And a fellow by the name of Joe Lambert played drums, but he's deceased now. So is Walter. You know, Walter Payton is no longer with us. And but that band, I had to do the singing because nobody else did. Little Daddy would sing a little bit, but not very much. I mean, and he preferred to just comp and play piano.
Leroy, you know, honestly, I think that all your playing comes from your singing. So it looks like you have produced some melodical lines what you can sing, and then your trumpet.
Well, I guess.
Just explain it.
Yeah. I mean, I think that every musician, you know, it's like, whatever instrument, the voice is an instrument, so what comes out is going to be the same way according to how much facility you might have to use that instrument. So you will speak what you will speak, but you just use a different tool to expound it with.
Exactly,
you know what I mean?
Exactly.
And but I think that my playing, I consider myself to be a lyrical player. I've been in situations where I've done things where I've had to play some modal things and use some different things that are not necessarily what would be considered so melodic in the sense that someone could really like sing it, you know, hum,
yes.
you know. But I think that for the most part, I prefer to be a player that if I'm not playing the melody, that you can still hear the melody in what I'm playing because
in between the written lines, I would say, yes.
Yeah, and I think that was evident in definitely Louis Armstrong's playing and Clifford Brown's playing. I mean, and Sonny Rollins is playing, and Miles is playing.
I'm happy you named Kenny Dorham.
Oh, Kenny is one of my. I have
great composer.
Yeah,
first of all.
all of that too. Yeah,
and very lyrical, very modest guy. I would say probably one of the modest, most modest trumpet player. So that's why he's never been on top like Miles. Who had a strong character.
Sure, and Blue Mitchell, another. Blue Mitchell. I mean, and Kenny, was there on the scene, Art Blakey, and with Horace Silver, and Casson, and I mean his articulation and his writing arrangements, and just his voice was distinct of his own from that same school, that bebop school. But you could tell the difference. I know when I hear Kenny Dorham. I know when I'm listening to Blue Mitchell.
John Henderson playing with him quite often.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and then
actually
Hank Mobley.
Hank Mobley tenor saxophone.
Because you got Hank Mobley, who is in lineage. Sonny Rollins is like that was his mentor, and you can hear that Sonny Rollins studied Hank Mobley. When you hear just the
it's interesting things. Actually, Hank Mobley, he was one of the rare musicians who very much influenced to John Coltrane. And then when John became a really great star, so Hank Mobley picked up several patterns, and that's a really interesting thing.
It's a the whole thing with jazz. I think the beauty of it is that it's a communication between musicians. It's something. Being from the city of New Orleans, that I realize it's a music that's meant for the people, for people who are not musicians to enjoy. And I know that I saw once on video an interview with Louis Armstrong was being interviewed, and the interviewer asked him, "Is his music, Mr. Armstrong, is your music folk music?" And Louis said, "Well, yeah, actually, it's music for folks, So,
it's a world game.
I said, well, that's true. That's a good way of putting it. It's music for folks, for people to come and enjoy. And New Orleans, originally that music was for dancing and for people to come in and feel good.
Leroy, by the way, what is the situation now in New Orleans? I've heard that jazz is not that popular and more or less it's a rock town. Is it true? No,
that's not true at all.
I'm happy to
hear it. There are more brass bands, and the brass bands. That's where I started playing jazz on the streets, just like Louis Armstrong, played on with Papa Celestine's the Tuxedo Brass Band, and then most of the musicians who played in those brass bands would go into the clubs and play set bands.
Mardi Gras Festival still rules.
That, and then there's always. The city thrives on tourism, so there's usually a lot of gigs each night of the week. You can find perhaps 70 to 80 clubs that have live music, and a lot of it is jazz. But then there's this, since Hurricane Katrina, there has been this influx of musicians from other parts of the United States who are playing on the street for tips because the weather's good most of the year. You can play outside; it's not so cold, and they're coming in and doing some things that are not really indicative of New Orleans, and sometimes the tourists get confused and think that that's New Orleans. So think it's not, but they're coming in, so everybody's jumping in on the bandwagon, and they play for tips outside, and so it's a mixture of different. We have funk, because you have George Porter, the bass player, who was with the Meters, and the Funky Meters, the Neville Brothers, You have Dumpster Funk, you have those guys are really doing like contemporary jazz. There's a mixture of fusion, funk, and jazz, and Astro Project. They're like modern, those guys. Johnny Madakovich,
and pop jazz comes from Shorty. Troy.
Trombone Shorty. Now he's doing more, what you would say,
pop
and rock. So
because it has a the music.
The New Orleans beat is in there.
It is.
And of course he's been influenced by Lenny Kravitz. So when you see Troy and you hear Troy, you can also see that he has gotten a concept from Lenny Kravitz. But he has also, because Lenny's not originally from New Orleans, even though he lives there sometimes.
Yeah,
but he but Troy is, putting the New Orleans rhythm and the funk and, the way he plays.
Sounds great. People
yeah.
love it.
Oh, yeah, he's a big star.
By the way, Leroy, are you still together with Harry Connick Jr. Orchestra?
Well, I'm actually, this is my last day in Finland. Tomorrow, Katya and I fly back home to New Orleans, and then Tuesday morning I have to fly out to San Diego to start rehearsals for a 4-week tour with Harry.
I see.
So I haven't toured with Harry for 7 years.
Wow.
Because I started with the big band with him in 1990.
Did you start in 1991?
90. June 1990, and it went all the way through to 2007. So 17 years I toured with Harry, off and on the road for, during the year. And also during that time I was doing other things, of course, recording a few of my own records, and then also getting to come to Europe and playing and meeting Katya later, and then coming to Finland the first time in '97, and then going back and working with different people, and met you, and got to play with you and the Cats, and come to Storyville, and so this is actually I'm filling in for the 4 weeks for the guy who took my spot, Mark Bro, who is the nephew of Wendell Brunius, another great trumpet player from New Orleans. And so I'll be out with him just around the West Coast and a bit of the Midwest of the United States.
I see.
And yeah, so.
But it's great that you reunion with Harry Connick Jr. because great big band. I've seen many videos when he invited you to make a solo, and you're a soloist of this band.
Yeah, and this is not the big band, actually. This is a small band, small big band, if you will. It's 2 trumpets and 2 trombones and alto and tenor.
I see.
And Harry's doing more of his original stuff from his latest records. I think one is called Smoky Mary, and the other one is called Every Man Should Know. And it's more of like his New Orleans R&B roots. This stuff we'll do some swing stuff, but I think more of the stuff would be, I'm playing in the section. He's got arrangements for these things that he sings, his tunes, and then Lucian Barberin, the trombonist, will be out there. So we'll still incorporate some of the New Orleans stuff with me and Lucian and him.
Great that you have this spirit. I mean, always when people listen to you, anywhere you play, Baltic jazz, Pori jazz, whatever, any other suggestions you play with Harry Connick, it's always not only jazz, but jazz came from New Orleans. That's fantastic. Leroy, thanks a lot, and thank you for the time, and I wish you every success and lots of inspiration. Thanks a lot.
Great to talk to you.
Bye-bye.
Cheers.